They are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Good morning, everyone. This is Russell Rucker, and I'm here for another constitutional talk. And I opened today with those words from the Declaration of Independence. But what do they really mean? A right to life? Are we talking about abortion? Of course we aren't. Liberty? Well, we all understand what that means, to be free to self-govern. And the pursuit of happiness? Well, that's an interesting phrase. And I want to go back today to what's known as the Boston Pamphlet. Now, we're talking 1772. We're talking several members of the Loyal Nine, Samuel Adams, James Otis, Joseph Warren among them. And this is an actual document called the Rights of the Colonists. And I bring up the Declaration of Independence in that language because under the Rights of the Colonists, it says, natural rights of the colonists as men. This is into several sections, this document is, among religious people and certain things. But this is under the natural rights of the colonists of men, which is the first section of this document. Among the natural rights of the colonists are these. First, a right to life. Secondly, to liberty. Thirdly, to property. Together with the right to support and defend them to the best manner they can. Those are evident branches of rather than deductions from the duty of self-preservation, commonly called the first laws of nature. The laws of God, the law of nature is kind of the same kind of thing in their mind. Okay, so when we're talking about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I think what they're really saying is the pursuit of property leads to the pursuit of happiness. All men have a right to remain in a state of nature as long as they please, a state of nature. Now, when our founders are talking about the state of nature, they're talking about the original founding, and there is no government. They came here and they cut down forests and they built a community. Then thereby they are in a state of nature. All men have a right to remain in a state of nature as long as they please. And in case of intolerable oppression, civil or religious, to leave the society they belong and to enter in another. And this is really what we're talking about when we're talking about the revolution, them wanting to leave Britain and form their own government. They want to enter into a new society. When men enter into society, it is by voluntary consent. And they have a right to demand and insist upon the performance of such conditions and previous limitations as form an equitable original compact. Well, you see, they're in this belief that they have a right to self-govern, that they have a right to decide their own fate. And as we get through this document, that's what they're talking about here. Every natural right not expressly given up or from the nature of a social compact necessarily ceded remains. And when you get to the Constitution, they are giving up certain rights to the federal government, and they're giving them up so that they can govern. Now, they're under the understanding that if they didn't give up these rights to the national government, they would still have to give up these same rights to the states because you had to have some sort of government, but they wanted it limited and such. All positive and civil laws should conform as far as possible to the law of natural reason and equity, And here we are using the word natural again, the natural law, their whole religious determination. As neither reason requires nor religious permits the contrary, every man living in or out of a state of civil society has a right peacefully and quietly to worship God according to the dictates of his conscience. Now, if you get back to the Bill of Rights, and as it was first discussed, there was this consciousness brought in, but the Senate removed that language. Just and true liberty, equal and impartial liberty, in matters spiritual and temporal, is a thing that all men are clearly entitled to by the eternal and immutable laws of God and nature, as well as by the law of nations, and all well-grounded municipal laws, which must have their foundation in the former. In regard to religion, mutual toleration in the different professions or dominations thereof is what all good and candid minds in all ages have ever practiced, and both by precept and example inculcated on mankind, and is now generally agreed among Christians that this spirit of toleration, in the fullest extent consistent with the being of civil society, is the chief characteristical mark of the true church. Insomuch that Mr. Locke has asserted and proved beyond the possibility of contradiction on any solid ground that such toleration ought to be extended to all whose doctrines are not subversive of society, the only sex, and by sex they mean different faiths, which he thinks ought to be, and which all wise laws are excluded from such toleration, are those who teach doctrines subversive of the civil government under which they live. The Roman Catholics or Papists are excluded by reason of such doctrines as these: that princes excommunicated may be deposed, and those that they call heretics may be destroyed without mercy, besides their recognizing the Pope in so absolute a manner in subversion of government by introducing as far as possible into the states under whose protection they enjoy life, liberty, and property. That solipsism, or error in language, in politics, imperium in imperio, leading directly to the worst anarchy and confusion, civil discord, war, and bloodshed. The natural liberty of man be entered into society is abridged or restrained so far only as is necessary for the great end of society, the best good of the whole. And this is where they're getting into natural law and all this kind of thing, and live as free as humanly possible. And he quotes Locke, and Locke was a great philosopher of the period that many of our founders followed. So keep that in mind a little bit. I know a lot of people aren't really familiar with Locke or his writings. They still are in print. The natural liberty of men by entering into society is abridged or restrained so far only as is necessary for the great end of society, the best good of the whole. The natural liberty of man is to be free from any superior power on earth, not to be under the will or legislative authority of man, but only to have the law of nature for his rule. In the state of nature, men may, as the patriarchs did, employ hired servants for the defense of their lives, liberties, and property. They should pay them reasonable wages. Government was instituted for the purposes of common defense, and those who hold the reins of government have an equitable, natural right to an honorable support from the same principles that the laborer is worthy of his hire. But then the same community which they serve ought to be the assessors of their pay. Governors have no right to seek and take what they please. By this, instead of being content with the stations assigned them, that the honorable servants of the society, they would soon become absolute masters, despots, and tyrants. Hence, as a private man has a right to say what wages he will give in his private affairs, so has the community to determine that they will give the grant of the substance for the administration of public affairs. And in both cases, more are ready generally to offer their service at the proposed and stipulated price that are able to willingly to perform their duty. In short, it is the greatest absurdity to suppose it in the power of one or any number of men at the entering into society to renounce their essential natural rights or the means of preserving those rights when the grand end of civil government, from the very nature of its institution, is for the support, protection, and defense of those very rights, the principle of which, as before observed, are life, liberty, and property. If men through fear, fraud, or mistake should in terms renounce or give up any of the essential natural rights, the eternal law of reason and the great end of society would absolutely vacate such renunciation, the right to freedom being the gift of Almighty God. It is not in the power of man to alienate this gift and voluntarily become a slave. And that's the end of section 1. Now, the rights of man, right to life, and life would not be taken from you unless upon judgment and justice. That liberty would not be denied you as long as you live by the rules of decent society, natural law, basically. And the right to obtain property. The right to obtain property to produce life in which you would live. As we live in a natural state, today we have a little harder concept because the idea of going west, young man, and getting land that way just doesn't really exist much anymore because everything has been settled. But in this period of time, they're talking about living in a natural state, going out in the wilderness, hunting and fishing on our own, with absolutely no government at all to control us. And that's living in a state of nature. If you're the first of any group of men in an area of unsettled territory, and Locke talks a lot about this kind of thing, and our founders, many of them are intent on this, but these are really the words of Otis and Adams as they argue in 1772 for the rights of the colonists. And the rights of the colonists are really the rights of Englishmen. Because as you get deeper into the document, they start talking about the English Constitution and the rights of British subjects. And they feel that these rights are being violated. And this document is written right after they disbanded their government, their colonial government. And so they're trying to establish a certain right. They're trying to tell the people that they have these rights. And they're trying to tell Britain that it's back off, we're going to govern ourselves. So in this period of time, in the 1770s, this is only 4 years before the Declaration of Independence. And they were having these same arguments throughout. But to begin with, they were kind of whispered, because you didn't know when you were going to run into somebody that was loyal to British subjects. But eventually, it was screamed. It wasn't whispered anymore. It was openly discussed. It was talked out loud. Because they realized that they had no other way. And as we approach next year, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, I would really like you to have a better idea of what they were talking about, what they were saying. So the right to life, liberty, and property. And among these are the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's pretty much the same thing. The language is just slightly changed. But I want you to think about that for a minute, because the pursuit of happiness, the way we talk about it today, can mean almost anything. But what they're really talking about is the pursuit of property. And with that, we'll catch you next time on the next Constitutional Talk. Please subscribe to my videos. Have a good day, folks, and bye for now.